So this is where we get into the issue of what happens. If you end up with a situation where more than about 40 billion of losses are put onto the Irish banking system, all of the capital is wiped out. There's only about 15 to 20 billion, depending on how you count it, of share capital in the banking system. So if you wipe out more than that, you end up with a situation where the banks need to get recapitalised, because banks need capital, like any other company. They need capital, and in fact they need more than any other company, because they have to have regulatory minima, a kind of a minimum buffer which is above safety levels. So this is the problem about valuation. Why are the government intent on doing this? Well, they say long-term economic value indicates that over the cycle, which is generally accepted, and Ronan will correct me on this, in the US particularly as being about an 18-year real estate cycle, from peak to peak, trough to trough. Governments seem to be working on a 7 or 10-year cycle, depending on who you listen to. Over that cycle, it would be wrong in some moral way to pay the banks the market value, because the market value is wrong. The market value is, in fact, way below what the real value is of the loans. Real value of the loans is more than the market value, therefore we'll pay more than the market value of the loans by a certain amount, and that will then allow the banks a bit of breathing space, because it's only fair to do that. Which is akin to somebody coming along and saying, look, I know my house is only worth 250,000, but in the long term, Ronan, I know your stuff, but in the long term, the fair long-term economic value is 400,000, so pay me 390 and we'll call it quits. That's what we're being asked to swallow. There's been an intensive debate about whether or not the long-term economic value concept bears any sense. It does, of course. In the long term, eventually, nominal house prices, nominal commercial property prices will rise. How long that will be is the problem. And as Keynes said, in the long run, we're all dead. Unfortunately, we'll all be dead and paying for NAMA. We also have an issue. So the first myth is that the banks, in some way, that the crash has been... Oh, you can ignore it. Sorry, that's my phone. In INSEAD, if your phone goes off during a lecture, you have to buy a bottle of champagne for everybody in the room. I'm not going to do that. I'm a cheapskate. NAMA will pay. The long-term economic value of the water I'll give you is actually champagne. So the first issue is, what is the long-term economic value concept? Conceptually, it's nice. In practice, it means as much as or as little as you want to believe. I'm not a believer that house prices or commercial property prices have stopped falling. I don't think anybody who's really observed this thinks that we're at the trough. We may be near the trough, we may see the trough. We're not at it. It could take a long time before that trough actually bottoms out and we begin to see an uptick. So why we should pay now more than the trough prices is unclear. Unless, of course, you want to set up a situation where you pay more than you have to, so that the losses are minimised, so that the government doesn't end up taking stakes in the banks beyond some predetermined and as yet unknown level above which it thinks that is a bad thing. The second issue, the second myth about NAMA is it'll cost us nothing. This again is part of the Frank Fahey School of Economics. These aren't real bonds. How Frank ever made a property portfolio while thinking about this in the bond market, I have no idea. The bonds are being issued in your name, and your name, and your name. And if NAMA can't pay for itself, you and you and you will pay for it. That's as simple as. Bonds are nothing more than IOUs. The government issue IOUs, and they have to pay them back. Not only does the government have to pay whatever coupon level, which is the annual rate of interest on the bonds, but of course eventually it will have to actually redeem those bonds. In other words, if I issue you with a 10-year bond at 4%, I'm saying I'll pay you 4% every year of an interest rate, and then after 10 years I'll pay you back the face value. So if the government issues 60 billion, for example, of bonds, they're going to have to pay back that 60 billion as well as interest on that 60 billion. Now, it appears as though, although we don't know, and this to me is an absolute mystery, why we can't know this, what the duration is of the bonds. Standard corporate finance would suggest that you fund assets buying compromised loans with a liability which is of the same duration. Just turn it off, Roland, sorry. Sorry, ignore it. We're not answering. You should get the hint. Just kill it. Sorry, I beg your pardon. You fund assets that are going to be 10 or 15 years in lifespan with bonds that approximate that. It looks, on the other hand, as though the government are going to do something else. They're going to engage in an incredibly dangerous Red Queen's race, which, if you remember Alison, the looking glass means you have to run faster and faster to stand still. And instead of issuing 60 billion or so of debt in your name over a 10-year period, it's going to be over a 1.5 or 1 year period. This is being done for one reason and one reason only. Knowing that interest rates are going to rise, this is incredibly foolish, first of all, and has to fly in the face of all advice that they are getting from NTMA and I presume from their economic advisors in the department. But it is being done simply and solely to ensure that Brian Lenihan can stand up and say, look, even people like Ronan Lyons are saying yields on commercial properties are about 3.5%. Sure, this is only costing us 1.5%. It's going to turn a profit. That's fine until 5 years down the line, when the interest rate cycle is ticked up and we're now paying, 3% on our 1.5 year bonds. The only people, literally, in the country who have made a reasonable effort under reasonable business assumptions with scenarios to work out the cost of NAMA are myself and Constantine. It is entirely stunning that the Department of Finance have not been able to put forward spreadsheets that say, here are a whole range of options. We're looking at this option. What do you think? Remember, people, it's your money. Unfortunately, it appears as though it's not your choice, to steal Eddie Hobbes's line. There is another myth out there which has come forward in the last couple of weeks. We've had huge numbers of discussions with Patrick Honohan. Very smart guy. Economist, don't you know? Not terribly keen on NAMA as it was. We're going to have risk sharing. Isn't that great? Instead of the banks themselves taking all of the goodies, we're going to have risk sharing. We're going to hold back something so that NAMA has to work. And if it doesn't work, the banks won't get paid. Nice idea. Problem is, that's not what Patrick Honohan said. Patrick Honohan, of course, now, and I'm not saying that he's not a man of integrity, having worked in a central bank, even the most junior person in the central bank knows, you've got to keep your mouth very firmly nailed shut. Because whatever you say will be almost certainly misinterpreted, and will be almost certainly taken as being some sort of gospel truth. So you've got to learn an incredible amount of discretion. This, by the way, you can imagine, didn't go down very well with me as a central banker. I don't like that. It is going to be very difficult, even if they came out with an absolute Honohan, pure and simple, for Patrick Honohan to say anything about NAMA. Because, you know what? He's got a bigger job to do. His job is not to worry about us. It's also to worry about the Germans and the Danes and the French and the European Central Bank. So he's got to be careful about what he says. It is now very clear that Honohan's original idea was that the shareholders in the banks, not the banks themselves, remember the banks are only a company, the shareholders in the banks would get shares in NAMA, so that the incentive set would be aligned. I, as a shareholder in AIB, would have shares in AIB, and I want that to do well, go AIB. I'd also have shares in NAMA, so I want NAMA to do well. So all incentives would be aligned. That's a nice theory. I have some issues about how it might work out, but it was a nice theory. What's going to happen, unfortunately, seems to be that the banks, not the shareholders, remember that, will get subordinated debt in NAMA, a small amount of it. This would basically be saying, look, we're going to pay 60 billion, we're going to give 50 billion up front, and we're going to give 10 billion up front, but a different kind of 10 billion. Instead of 10 billion straight up NAMA bonds, they're purple NAMA bonds, because they're the same thing, just different colour. And they won't pay a penny to the banks unless NAMA makes a profit. In fact, they won't be redeemed unless NAMA makes a profit. So the banks really have to work hard to make sure that the whole thing works properly. 5 years down the line, we will have somebody saying, it is impossible for this government not to honour these purple subordinated NAMA bonds, because the default on those would be equivalent to defaulting on national debt. We can't possibly do that. Even though NAMA hasn't made a profit, we find ourselves reluctantly forced to pay the subordinated debt.